Jessica Crow. I'm the founder of Apogee and the host of Change Leader Insights, which is a podcast all about leadership and change. And we think about it in three different ways: self-leadership, team leadership, and change leadership. And today I have here with me Jodi Brandstetter. She is the CEO of Influence Network Media. She's the author of 3 books. She's a lead facilitator for By Design Brainery, and she's a brand strategist. And when I first spoke with Jodi, I was really impressed with her knowledge of design thinking, not only how she applied it to her role when she was in HR to improve processes and value delivery, but how she's applied it to her own life, from taking the leap from being an HR professional to becoming an author, a publisher, and a coach. And design thinking is a really hot topic in leadership change and innovation. So I'm really happy, Jodi, to have you here on the show today. Thank you so much for making time. I know I gave a little bit of an overview, but how about your backstory? Tell us who you are and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jessica. I'm so excited to chat with you again. Our first conversation, I thought, went really well. So I'm excited to be here. And yeah, my name's Jodi. I'm originally from Indiana. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio now. I've been in HR, mostly talent acquisition, for over 20 years. Like, I'm almost on my 25th year. So I've been in it for a while. Yes, it's been a lot of experience. But the last 5 years, I started my entrepreneur journey, decided to leave corporate America. I wanted flexibility. I wanted to own my own job, my own career, be my own boss. So I did that by becoming pretty much a recruiter, a contract recruiter. I had a lot of stints where I helped when someone was on maternity leave to then evolving into a consultant for companies to help them use design thinking in their hiring strategies. And now, I really focus on helping people brand themselves in the way they want to be branded, but also elevate their careers, their companies through design thinking methodologies.
Yeah, which is so incredible. So for those of the listeners that aren't familiar with design thinking, what is that exactly?
Yeah, so it's a methodology. If you know Lean or Six Sigma, like all of these are methodologies that you can use when you're trying to solve a problem, you have a challenge. What design thinking does differently is that it looks at the challenge not just in a business perspective, but through the lens of a person. Every challenge we have in an organization deals with people.
Absolutely. Yes.
So if you want to be able to solve a problem that people have, you really need to think about them too. And so that's what
Yeah.
design thinking does. It looks at the lens of, is it desirable as far as like how you're going to solve this problem? Will people do it? But then they also look if it's feasible and viable for the business. You can't move forward a process that's awesome for people if it's going to hinder the company. So you
Right.
really have to have a nice little blend of making sure it works on both sides. And that's exactly what design thinking does.
Yeah. And I think that's why people who are practicing change management, full-time practitioners, are so interested in learning more about design thinking, because what we do as change leaders is think about the needs, the experience of the people that are impacted by those innovations, the changes that are happening in the organization. So there's a lot of synergy there. When you and I first spoke, you even applied design thinking to how you made the decision to move from where you were to becoming an entrepreneur. What was that process like for you? Because, as we think about self-leadership, team leadership, change leadership, that's sort of a great starting point, that foundation of what do I need as myself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times we forget to check in on ourselves and
Yeah.
understand our needs, our wants, and our desires. We think about everyone else, right? Our families, our companies, the businesses that we work for. And so when I was transitioning from corporate America to being an entrepreneur, one, I didn't know what design thinking was. So everything that I was doing that was design thinking focused, no clue that there was a methodology for it. But, one thing that I've always believed in is that failure is actually a positive thing. It helps you learn and grow. So every time I failed as a business owner, I took that experience and said, how can I do it better next time? Or was that the
Yeah.
right route for me? And, when I was transitioning from corporate America to entrepreneur, the first thing I did was I did what was easy, what I could
Hmm.
do simply. And that was go straight into being a recruiter. I've been
Hmm.
that my whole life. Even when I was a leader in an organization, I always continued to recruit. So it
Hmm.
was so easy to do that. And then I realized like I didn't push myself. I didn't
Right.
expand. I didn't ideate on
Right.
what are these other things I want to do. I didn't think about my purpose.
Hmm.
My purpose wasn't to be a recruiter for other organizations. My purpose was to serve others and to
Yeah.
help them do better. So, that is 100% like a general phrase that every design thinker is focused on is how can we
Yeah.
do better for others? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you don't focus on, I mean, yeah, you focus on yourself, but when you're thinking about solving a problem, it's usually not your problem you're solving.
Right. That's a good point. And so, as you were thinking about applying and you applied design thinking to what, how do I serve others? From that came the idea to, okay, well, maybe I can, well, you started to research, I believe, design thinking at length and got really excited about it. And, you're like, oh, now I'm so knowledgeable in this space. I'm going to write a book about it. I'm going to write 3 books about it.
Yes. Yeah. So one thing I learned when I became an entrepreneur is you have to separate yourself. You have to be the obvious choice to your clients. So
Yeah.
how can I separate myself from maybe other HR consultants? And the first thing I thought about was the methodology. If I
Yeah.
use a methodology, my clients will probably, want that, right? Every company loves to have a step 1 to a step 2 to a step
Yes.
3. It's nice to have a process. And I am extremely process driven in general.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
started researching methodologies, came to design thinking and thought, that's interesting, and kind of just put it in the back of my mind. And then I was at a HR conference and there was a design thinking course, and I was like, "Ooh, I'm gonna go." And then I sat there going, "I love this." I loved that it made me think outside the box. It made
Yeah.
me really think about who I was, trying to solve this problem for.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it made me realize that HR, the biggest thing that we do is experiences. We help
Mhm.
provide experiences for employees, for candidates, for our business, the business owners, so that that experience is something that people want to come back to and
Yeah.
they want to do it again, right? Like no one wants to hire someone and they don't come back to day 2, right? That's
Right.
like the worst experience.
Right.
So how do you keep them coming back? How do you keep them wanting to stay, coming back to their job or to their organization? Same with customers, you want
Yeah.
your customer to come back. So yeah, I just fell in love with it and then decided, well, I probably should be I'm like that person that like goes down a rabbit hole and doesn't come out. And so that rabbit hole led me to IDOU. I got the advanced certification
Uh-huh.
and fell in love with it, started using it with my clients. And then, yeah, I
Mhm.
was like, well, I know so much about it, might as well write a book.
Share
And
that
I,
wisdom.
yeah, and I wanted to share it in a way that the people who I serve can use it. And that's why I did Hire by Design, because it helps
Mhm.
you see it, how to use design thinking and hiring, which is
Yeah.
not the traditional route that most people think of design thinking for. They think
Right.
about products. So I'm like, let me shine a light on how this can work within the space that I know best.
Yeah. And I think that, it's very relevant for change management professionals. And many are actually in HR organizations today, or there's HR professionals who are required to leverage their change management skills because what they're doing is rolling out programs and processes and policies that impact the end user. And, you mentioned you want the hiring, the candidate to come back, you want the customer to come back. And in the change management world, you want to have your end user accept, adopt, and sustain the change. And that sustainment piece means that's resilience. They're coming back. They're not quitting their jobs. They're not having their, morale affected. And so I think that's a really great way to, for people who are listening, think about, go learn more about design thinking and how you can apply that as a change leader, a team leader. And to that end, so if I am the manager of a team, and let's say I have a team that sort of gets along, sort of doesn't, and I want to help them become even more effective with whatever it is we're doing, HR or any function aside, how could I apply design thinking to that, to team leadership? Can you give me some examples that might be helpful for people who lead people?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing you want to do is really understand your team and your
Mm-hmm.
team dynamics. And
Mm-hmm.
so within design thinking, that's understanding your audience. And that
Mm-hmm.
really lies heavily on empathy
Mm.
and observation and interviewing and really kind of understanding
The
the
current state.
individuals. Yeah,
Yeah.
the current state. And design thinking doesn't do focus groups where you take someone out of their, normal state environment and ask
Mhm.
questions. It says to observe. So the first thing I would do if I do this whenever I'm a leader or in a group, is
Yeah.
I sit and listen.
Mm.
And I just want to see what people are saying, what people are doing. And I take notes, and those notes are either questions that I have or just observations, or, like for example, if one of your team members always has headphones in, what are they listening
Mhm.
to? What are they doing? I'm curious. I'm a
Right.
nosy
Yeah.
person. And that's great for design thinking. You want to kind of be nosy.
Yeah.
So, you want to observe your team.
Mhm.
And then you want to go back and interview your team one
Mhm.
on one with specific questions that you want to understand. So if you see dynamics aren't working well between different people on your team, you're never going to know unless you ask what's going on.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you may have questions around there. You might have questions from your observation, like, hey, I see you have your earbuds in. Are you listening to a podcast? Is it music? Like what keeps you so focused at work that you're doing such a
Mhm.
great job, right? You're just learning about the person. Um, and that really helps you then understand what challenges are they facing.
Right.
We have assumptions that, Joe and Jan aren't getting along when actually they get along just fine. It's just that they're very open with each other. Their dialogue's very open. It
Yeah.
might sound aggressive, but they actually work well together.
Got
And
it. Yeah.
what the problem is no one understands that around them. And
Got
so
it.
all of a
Yeah.
sudden you have to make sure they know, like, Joe and Jan actually enjoy working together. They like pushing each other's, boundaries, helping them expand and continue to grow. So
Yeah.
you have to really get to know the team. So
Mhm.
you should never be stuck in your office all day unless, you have back-to-back meetings. I totally get it, but you want to be out there with your team as much as you possibly can.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and if you're virtual, that's a little bit harder. So it's more of like having, maybe a remote party where everybody's just working while they're on a virtual meeting together.
Yeah.
So you want to really get to know them. Then you can start looking at how you can solve some problems or challenges they have.
Got
And
it.
then if you know your team that well, wow, how awesome would it be to bring someone on that team? How awesome would it be for a candidate to hear a manager who can actually talk about their team in a holistic, authentic way?
Right.
And I
Right.
want to be on that team. I want a manager who understands me and who I am and what drives me, what motivates me, what makes me excited, what, excuse my language, pisses me off. I want
Right.
that person. That's going to be a manager who's going to get me and to help me, be the best employee I can be. So
Yeah.
really having a good understanding, a good foundation of what your team is going to help you bring the right new team players into your team.
Yeah, and go through that problem solving process that you mentioned.
Mhm.
When it comes to change leadership, change is often we rely on our managers, our frontline managers, to be those advocates and implementers of change. And that, if they don't have that good pulse on the people leadership piece, right? Maybe they haven't been trained themselves. Could they use design thinking to optimize and develop the team? And then so when a change is happening in the organization, then they could use their design thinking too, right? To implement with support from their leadership, the change across the team. So let's say they're implementing, I don't know, a new policy that affects people, right? There's a return to work a couple days a week. Like, how could I, as a team leader, leverage my design thinking to implement this policy? And I'm just sort of, based on what you're saying, it'd be understanding the team, like what works for them when they work at home, what works for them when they work in the office, and coming up with some agreements on how that's going to look and feel. And then, so that's sort of like using design thinking, right, to implement a
Mhm.
change. Should I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we just take that policy to the next level, so once you really understand your team and those
Mm-hmm.
dynamics, now you can be creative and innovative and come up with a variety of ideas on what this policy does. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So now that you understand your team, let's just say that, when your team's pulling reports, the best place to do that is from home, less
Mm-hmm.
distraction. So maybe what days do they pull the reports? Those are the days that they get to work from home,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So coming up with all these different ideas on how to, base this policy and then not just making that decision in a silo,
Right.
going back and saying, "Hey, team, I have all these wonderful ideas." Or bring your team into the ideation session, do brainstorming together and say, let's come up with ideas. But getting feedback,
Yeah.
understanding if it's going to work or not. Not saying that every policy is going to be perfect for
Right.
the employee, but how awesome would it be, Jessica, if you knew that a policy was being made for a return to work and that you
In the first
understood
place, right?
why, yeah,
Yeah.
why that was
Yeah.
happening, and that you saw that they were taking into consideration what the employees thought. So
Yeah.
much of the time it's closed door, you don't know what's going on. That uncertainty kills us all as people. I mean, it just
Yeah.
makes your creativity go down. Like, uncertainty is horrible. So just having a little bit of an open dialogue is something that design thinking can do, because you have to get feedback to continue through the process. And
Yeah.
then the other thing that, when you're thinking about this with design thinking, is the prototyping stage. A
Yeah.
prototype is not the solution. It's not the final solution. It's a
Mhm.
test.
Right.
Let's test it out. Let's take 90 days and let's test out this new back to work policy. And
Yeah.
throughout that time, I'm going to stress test it, see how it's working. And then we're going to say, is it working or not? And it
Right.
could be pretty solid, but just needs to be tweaked here and there. That's iteration. And all of a sudden, you have a better policy than what you
Yes.
created. And it still meets the expectations of the business and the people. And it's going to work well. Now,
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, with that example, you're going to have people who refuse to come back to the office, and you're
Right.
going to lose them in general. Like,
Right.
this isn't perfection. This isn't going to like make, rainbows and sunshine is not, the end of design thinking,
Yeah.
but it does hopefully help you with creating a solution that's going to work well. That's going to, hopefully improve what's going on today. And the main thing to me is the iteration part. You don't just
Mhm.
let it sit there and gather dust and say,
Yeah.
this is the policy. We've had this policy for 5 years. No, you keep looking at it and going, does it still work? Is it still effective?
Yeah, that
And if
coming
it's
back
not,
to it piece.
yeah, come back to it. Like, nothing should be stagnant within your policies, your procedures. Doesn't mean that you're going to change them every 6 months, but you're at least
Right.
going to go back and revisit it. I mean, as an HR person and as a TA person, I tell people they should be applying to their own positions at least once a year, if not twice a year,
Got
to
it.
see how it feels, because
Yeah.
things change, right? Like,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, if you don't have a laptop anymore and you only have your mobile and you apply and it's a horrible experience, guess what? Other people like you only have their mobile. So
Right.
maybe you need to make it mobile friendly, or maybe you get rid of the application. I don't know, but you
Right.
can't fix it unless you know it's broken.
Right. That's so everything that you've said, there's so many similarities, and I guess synergies between design thinking and change management. When you were talking about how some people will just never want to come back to work, we call those resistors or detractors in change management. And one of the biggest challenges in change management is bringing that end user, that impacted stakeholder into the process. Often change management is brought in after the strategic decision has been made, after they've configured or designed or developed whatever the solution is going to be, whether it's, a structure, people, process. And they're like, okay, change management leaders, go implement this change. And we're often advocating for, hey, we need to be further upstream in the process. By the way, so do these impacted stakeholders. But what you're giving us in this conversation is a tool to say, let's leverage our design thinking. Let's bring that into the conversation to make this a holistic end-to-end experience. So, I love that. I'm really excited about this conversation because I think we can leverage design thinking to do just that, to be a part of those strategic conversations, to do that prototyping, to be iterative, and to not work in silos and just implement things and really think about, if we're going to do this, how does it impact my team? How does it impact other teams? And have more collaboration, I guess, across the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does design thinking, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, HR has the same problem. We
Yeah.
get thrown in at the end. Like,
Yeah.
hey,
Like,
here's
fix
the work.
this.
Here's the workforce planning. Go find these people in a place that no one lives. Go, be. And so that's one of the reasons I thought design thinking is great for HR too, because
Yeah.
it's a strategic method of solving problems that you can do within your own team and then highlight it to the rest of the organization, saying, look what we were able to do with this tool that we have. And oh, by the way, if you include us in these conversations, like that's, so it just gives a lot of reasons why leaders or other departments want to work with you and bring you in earlier than later.
Well, the whole adoption piece becomes almost a non-issue because you're building that into your process by having people involved early on and helping co-create not just the plan to implement, but the actual solution. What do you think are some of the most challenging aspects of being able to implement design thinking? And I'll just give an example. I feel like I know from experience, time. There's a lot of, we've got a deadline. We don't have time, we don't have 6 weeks for this to happen. We don't have 3 months to test this out. Is there a place in design thinking where, building the business case, and I'm sort of like, I guess, brainstorming right now, but how can we leverage design thinking to advocate for just more appropriate or feasible modes of operating without impacting the business and our, organization's ability to be responsive and competitive? I mean, how would you, any idea there?
I mean, design thinking is not something that should take, it can take 6 months, right? But you can do it in a day. Like legit, when you talk about a policy, it's not like you're building a product, right? You're talking about a document that you're, trying to build. So, one thing I would say is, if you're concerned about the timing or the amount of effort each step takes, put it through a very simple problem and solve that before you go to your bigger problems.
Yeah.
Because once you do it, just like everything else, the more you do it, the more comfortable, the more, you include it into, it becomes part of your process and everything. So that's one thing to think about is don't put it in the largest problem that you have in your organization.
Right out the gate. Yeah.
Maybe find something smaller to play with. Right. And this is very much a playing type methodology. You want to be engaged, you want to be, exploring. So, definitely making it a little bit more of a fun situation is also a perk and a benefit of design thinking. But the other thing about design thinking too is, I don't know, most probably design thinkers probably like don't like when I say this, but you don't have to do the whole thing. Like you're trying to figure out how to find more candidates in a specific, area of the world. Brainstorm, do a brainstorm session. That could be literally 5 minutes. I mean, it doesn't have to be like 20 minutes of like coming up with ideas. Because if you think about it, you have 10 people in a room, you give them a minute, all of them come up with 10 ideas. That's 100 ideas. Yeah. Do you need more than that?
No.
No. And in fact, when you see those 100 ideas, you're then going to be able to say there's themes and say, here's this theme and here's that theme. And all of a sudden you're clustering all these ideas. And then you're having a conversation saying, oh, I really like this idea, but a concern that we have would be X, Y, and Z. Then one of those other 9 people either, give you the reason why that's not a concern, or say, you know what, I get that. I see that. Look at this idea. This idea looks
Mhm.
really amazing. And all of a sudden you're coming together maybe in a 30-45 minute session, and you come up with maybe 2 or 3 ideas on how to recruit a candidate in a space that is hard to find, a hard skill set or a hard location. And it took you 30 to 45 minutes. And now
Right,
you have a
right.
strategy to move forward with. Just like, so you don't have to, in my opinion, go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. If you already understand your audience,
Yeah,
move forward. If you already have like 5 ideas, prototype them,
right.
test them out. It's one of those things where I feel like it has a nice flow if you go from step 1 to step 5, but I think you can jump in at other steps and still get the benefit of
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
So don't feel like, and that's the other thing, like everyone's like, I have to go from one thing to another, like a robot. No, we can, we can change it up. We can, you can start with the prototype and realize you failed. It was the worst prototype ever, and say, I need to go back to
Go back to one
go
step.
back. But that doesn't mean you can't start there,
I really
so
like that you're saying this because there's a lot of people that I have coached in change management and especially project management. No offense to project managers, but they're very linear. Like, I got to do this and this and this. A lot of it's around documentation and following the steps. And it makes sense. And it's refreshing to hear that, adapt this methodology based on what your needs are, what the current situation is. And I would say the same applies to change management methodology. If you're stuck in this rigid, I have to do these things, and you're not thinking about it right. It's about meeting people where they're at, and that includes your team and, the broader organization. So that's a key message, folks. Adapt.
yeah.
Adapt your methodologies.
And let me give you like a super easy, fast way to ideate and do a
Yeah.
brainstorm session,
Yeah.
because people are probably like, we don't all go in the same office anymore, Jodi. Like, we're not
Yeah.
there together. And I get it. So I'm going to go ahead and share what's called an e-storm. And that's where you put your problem out there. You shoot an email to like 10 people and say,
Uh-huh.
hey, here's my problem. Can you send me 3 ideas to solve it? And
Oh,
then all of a
fun.
sudden, you now have 3 ideas from 10 people. You have 30 ideas, and it was an email that you sent. An
Yeah.
email. Then you can then look at those and cluster and theme them out. And maybe you have like 3 ideas that you feel like are solid. Shoot them back to the 10 people that you asked the problem and say, here's my top 3. Which one would you start with?
Yeah. Oh,
It's
I love that.
not like, I feel like everyone wants to make it so structured and so like perfect. And
Right.
we're not in a perfect world, and we're never going to be in a perfect world. So even if you just try a little bit of design thinking here and there, I think it's really going to benefit you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the key message too is make time for it. I think we get so stuck in our patterns and habits and processes, to your point, that we're not thinking about how can I do this better with the end user in mind. Jodi, this was a wealth of knowledge. Where can people go to buy your books, to get coaching from you, to learn from you? Where's the best places to find you on online or
So
wherever else?
yeah, so all of my books are on Amazon. So you can put in Jodi with an I and then Brandstetter. And if you don't think there's a T in it, just add another T. There's a lot of T's to the last name. But you can find all my books there. And then my favorite social media and my go-to is LinkedIn. So please connect with me there. I connect with
Wonderful.
everyone. And I share all my content there as well.
Perfect. Okay. Well, Jodi, this was great. I'm so grateful that you took the time to explain design thinking, to put it into really relevant, easy to understand examples. I have no doubt the Change Leader Insights community is going to benefit from this conversation. So thank you for making time to share your wisdom with us. And yeah, check out Jodi, LinkedIn, go to Amazon, buy her books. I have bought one of her books. I actually got the HR by Design, so it's in the mail. I can't wait to read it. Thank you again. Have a great rest of your day. And yeah, I look forward to keeping in touch with you.
Yes, thank you. I love the conversation, and And yeah, I hope this helps. And like I said, just try to dabble in it a little bit and see what
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, that's okay. Find something that works for you, but at
Awesome.
least try.
Absolutely. Great message. All right. Thanks again, Jodi. Have a great day.
Thanks.